Hello and you're welcome to the Big Tech Show with me, Adrian Weckler. Now, can anything be done about dynamic pricing for concert tickets or age restrictions for adult-themed content for teenagers online? And is the arrest of Telegram's Pavel Durov a warning shot for Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk? Well, JJ Clark and I are here to look at all of these issues. But JJ, I'm going to start with the Telegram issue, because one of the things that a lot of people are asking is whether or not this is a warning shot against the bows for Mark Zuckerberg and for Elon Musk of X, because if Pavel Durov, the founder of Telegram, can be arrested for stuff that happens on his network, surely that would mean that somewhere down the line, countries like France or the EU or maybe Brazil are thinking of that they're going to try and go after the likes of Elon Musk for stuff that happens on X.
Yeah, I'm not sure quite where I stand on it, because obviously, you know, the message is clear that you want to stop the trafficking of, you know, child pornographic images on, you know, messaging apps like Telegram and such. But, you know, at what stage do you say who he's responsible or not is a sort of open question to me still.
There is and there isn't an open question from the point of view of the authorities. So the reason that he was arrested, and that, for example, Mark Zuckerberg isn't arrested if there's ever, you know, child abuse imagery that happens on WhatsApp, which is an end-to-end encrypted service, is because most of Telegram is not encrypted in the way that we understand it to be encrypted. So let's just back up for a second here. So you have encryption, which can just mean that it's technically safe from hackers and they do their proper IT security hygiene. You then have end-to-end encryption. And what that means is that if you send me a message or anything, a video, any content at all, that there is no way for anyone, not a hacker, not someone outside our network, and crucially, not WhatsApp, to look or detect anything at all about what's in that message. So WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted. Signal is end-to-end encrypted. But the only part of Telegram that's really end-to-end encrypted properly is their secret chat feature. And that's a small part of the service. So remember what Telegram is. I don't know, have you used Telegram?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
And I mean, is there a sense that, so the stuff in between, like that a message could be intercepted? Is that?
It could be, or it could be parsed, or there could be metadata from some of the content on Telegram which could be useful in an investigation or as part of an approach to trying to detect signals that illegal activity might be going on there. And that is why he was arrested in Paris. And just coming back to the difference between Telegram and WhatsApp, the reason that he was arrested and not Mark Zuckerberg is because you can fairly clearly see, it doesn't take much work to find illegal activity on Telegram, because most of the activity is not end-to-end encrypted, whereas it is on WhatsApp, which means that if they wanted to, if Pavel Durov wanted to, he could go in and, you know, put in systems that would detect some of that. And morally and legally, he has a responsibility to do that. Whereas end-to-end encryption is a kind of a handy get-out-of-jail clause, literally, in saying that you actually technically can't do that. But just to finish the point about Telegram, Telegram is it's messaging, but it is also huge groups of up to 200,000 members.
Right.
And it's also unlimited audiences of more than 200,000 people if you want. And that's what a lot of people use Telegram for.
Is it so that you can, you know, as in it has a certain reputation?
It's a broadcast medium.
Yeah.
It's media. I mean, in Russia and Ukraine, where it's particularly popular, it's used by the administration there. It's used by the military. It's used by bloggers, pundits, commentators, politicians. It's a utility. That's why, ironically, they were first out of the gate. When Pavel Durov got arrested in Paris, the number one diplomatic mission complaining about this was the Russian one.
Yeah, and he's also a Russian citizen, isn't he?
He's a Russian citizen, but he got run out of Russia
right.
11 years ago. Ironically, because he wouldn't moderate or block or take down content that the Putin administration at the time wanted him to. So he left Russia. He went to live in Dubai. He also, ironically, has French citizenship. He picked up a French passport along the way, which is probably the reason that he was arriving there. But he was run out of Russia. He went to live in the Middle East. But because the Russians find Telegram so useful, they now see this as an attack kind of on their interest. By the way, Russia isn't the biggest user of Telegram. India is. It's 100 million users in India. It has 950 million users worldwide. So it's not all just dark web kind of criminals.
Yeah, and I suppose the move of it to be, say if Pavel Durov, went in and got his brother to change around the programming and said, okay, we're going to do end-to-end encryption. Why does it have the reputation of being kind of more covert than the likes of WhatsApp, even though WhatsApp is end-to-end encryption, i.e. I see the message that I send, and then the only other eyeballs theoretically are the person who receives the message?
I think maybe a better way of looking at it, I wouldn't say it has a reputation of being more covert than WhatsApp. I think it has a reputation of being more underground.
Right.
Anyway, let's move on. The issue of moderation when it comes to teenagers and young people. And it's a big issue in Ireland at the moment. We've got government ministers like Health Minister Stephen Donnelly coming out and saying that social media should be banned for teenagers, that maybe that smartphones should be banned for teenagers as well. And there are a lot of problems with this, a lot of challenges with this. I'm not sure that society agrees. In fact, I'm fairly sure that parents and teens do not agree with that if you look at polling. But it's possible that society has, the society as a whole has sympathy with that position. A Sunday Independent poll that we ran last weekend suggested that around over half of people agree with Minister Donnelly when he talks about the harm that social media does to teenagers being so bad that it's worth maybe banning social media for teenagers. The question is, how do you do it?
Okay. Verification.
Now, I've had a look at this in some depth in today's newspaper, and really, when you talk about age verification, you're asking how can you actually stop a child of say 11 or 12, or even a child of a teenager of 14 from getting onto social media. There are a few problems, but let's look at the ways that it happens at the moment. Okay, so what do the social media networks do? Well, they have the voluntary age gate, which is useless.
Yeah. Are you over 18? And you just punch yes.
Or put in your birth date. You put in your birth date and it shows that you're only 12. And, and it's useless. You put in your birth date, shows that you're 49. And it lets you into everything.
Right.
It's utterly useless. So then the next step is that they say that they start monitoring your behavior in terms of the type of activity that you do. So around your birth date, for example, they see what people are saying to you, whether they're saying to you, happy 11th birthday. They look at things like uploads that you might do. So if you're uploading photos or videos of yourself and you're clearly a young child, that they say, the social networks, and I'm talking about TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, they say that attaches a flag to that and that they look at it more closely, okay? And that they may intervene in that point. And then there's one other instance. There's one thing that Instagram does, whereas if you put in your real age as a child, realize your mistake, and then try and go and put yourself in as a 19-year-old, that it will require documentary evidence. Now, there are other age verification technologies used. Like, for example, credit card is generally seen as indicating that you're over 18. If you use a banking app like Revolut, they now look for driver's license, passport photo, some sort of photo government ID, plus your PPS number to use Revolut. So the precedent is there to use government ID as to access a service. The question is whether it's proportionate for us all to keep using Facebook or WhatsApp or Instagram or TikTok tomorrow to all now have to upload our passports. And if so, whether we're cool with that, whether we think they'll be safe, and also whether it is proportionate, whether we think that the harm that social media is causing kids and teens is enough of a harm to require the rest of us to upload our passports? And that's where the question gets emotive, and that's where it gets difficult.
Yeah,
And
that's the moral panic around it. Yeah, but I mean, it could be like, as you say in the article, like smoking or the new smoking or even secondhand smoke, as in that it becomes everyone else's problem and you have to hand over your passport details to a social media company. And it's like, I don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, and there are, so before I get on to what I think is the main challenge and the main problem here, let's look at what Ireland is doing at the moment. So what is coming in? What are we actually doing at the moment? Well, we have a regulator called Commission na Man, and they're operating largely on the Digital Services Act. And what they are going to bring in is an online safety code, and they're going to bring it in later this year. And they are going to ask social media firms to verify the age of kids in an effective way, quote unquote. Now, are they telling, Meta and TikTok and X and Snapchat how to do it or what needs to be done? Nope. They're just saying it needs to be effective. So they're leaving it nice and vague. So then how do you measure whether it's effective? Well, that presumably will be the conversation that determines whether they then take a further view as to whether stuff is specifically. Now, interestingly, use of TikTok and Snapchat, according to the massive CyberSafe Kids survey of 7,100 primary school children in the last week, use of TikTok and Snapchat among under 13s has gone down in the last year. That will allow those two services to not do anything different at all, but to be able to say to Commission Man, we are taking action for effective age verification. And the things that we're using, the pattern recognition, the stuff I spoke about earlier, that is working. We don't need to look for passports.
Our house is in order.
Our house is in order.
Yeah.
Now, you look at what other countries are doing. The UK did want to introduce a system where documentary ID or selfies would be used as a verification technique to prove that to indicate that somebody was over 16 or over 18. They've abandoned that for two reasons. One, they say that selfies and video selfies are unreliable when it comes to kids because children can look very, very different at different age. Anyone under the age of about 17 or 18, there's a wide variance of how they look physically. It's just too unreliable. You can't use it effectively. And second, that photo government ID for under 18s, like we live in countries that don't have national identity cards, so it's quite difficult. It's more complex to. So they've abandoned that.
But biometrics, I thought, would have been a cure-all, because if you look vastly different under the ages of 18, then it sort of proves that you're under 18. Whereas biometrics, I believe, basically your face is unique in that your ears, in relation to where they are on your face, is completely unique.
What about your man, from the actor from Different Strokes? Is it Gary Coleman?
Okay,
he was like 30 and he looked like his whole character was based on Arnold, based on being an 11-year-old.
Yeah. I mean, I understand that, so that that would cut out and reverse. But I mean, as well as that, like alcohol at one stage wasn't policed, post-prohibition, you had a situation, and then laws came in Ireland, you have to be 18, spirits and, whatnot.
But they don't find Guinness.
Right.
They don't make Guinness responsible.
But my point is,
who do they make responsible? And now we're getting into the key thing.
Yes, but so for example,
like the shop.
Yeah, the shop, right? But you're under 18. I'm 16. I want to go drinking with my friends, and I have an older brother, or I wait outside the off license, and so is this destined to be a situation in which the older brother is found online? That you'll figure out a ways and means to navigate.
Yeah,
young people are smart.
Not only are young people smart, but the key flaw in all of this, which no politician that I have asked or spoken to, and I've spoken to some senior ones in recent days, very senior, like some of the ones making these requests, they won't go near this one question. What do you do about the parents? According to the CyberSafe Kids survey of 7,100 children between the ages of 8 and 14, 59% of 11-year-olds have a smartphone. 59%, that's almost 2/3. How did 59% of 11-year-olds get a smartphone? Who gave them one?
Mum and dad.
Absolutely mum and dad. Now, why did they give them one?
Pacify them.
Huh?
Pacify them. Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's entirely the case. That's probably part of the reason, the same way as a 6-year-old wants to use the iPad, for example.
Watch this.
Yeah. But an 11 and a 12-year-old, or and certainly a 13-year-old, is it just to pacify them? Is it just because of peer pressure? We need to actually have a different type of conversation in addition to the moral panic one that we currently have in this country. And the conversation we need to have is, why do parents give their kids smartphones? And one of the answers is security.
Yeah, I need to know where they are.
The deal with giving a 12-year-old child, a smartphone is normally that they have their location sharing feature on Google Maps on, or they have their Find My on an iPhone on.
Right.
That's normally the deal. We're no longer living in an era where parents of 11-year-old kids don't know much about tech. That era is gone. That might be the era of 50-something Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael politicians. It is not the era of parents of 11 and 12-year-old kids. They live in a very different reality, a reality where it is utterly normal, morally, ethically, and in every way, to give your child a smartphone at the age of 12 or 13. That is absolutely normal in Ireland. By the time kids are 13 in Ireland, something like 75% or 80% of them have a smartphone. This is not something they're being tricked into doing. This is part of normal internal family dynamics. We can't have... There's no ban, there's no legislative proposal short of threatening to fine or criminalise parents who do it.
Which is silly.
And treating it like it's, in some countries they fine parents or prosecute parents if their kids are out and commit a crime, okay? Unless you're willing to take in that sort of a measure, and I don't think any of us are, no matter what the rhetoric of politicians on the radio. We need to look at a consensus-based system. Maybe we can cut back on the amount of smartphone time and social media that kids are using. Maybe those experiments that they're doing in Bray and in other areas where most of the primary schools in the area, they try and sort of get parents and teachers together and get them to agree that there will be either no smartphones or fewer smartphone or less smartphone use. A consensus community base.
Right.
That creates a scenario where, this can happen effectively and organically. There is no world in which a 15-year-old is not going to use a smartphone. That's just gone.
Right.
There's no possibility at all of that happening. The overall point, smartphones and social media aren't some sort of niche activity that comes on top of the rest of life.
No.
I don't care what Irish Times columnists or government ministers try to frame it as. It's utterly wrong. It's utterly wrong.
It's a counterculture, like even the Wicklow stuff that you mentioned. It's a
counterculture to try and clamp down on.
Yeah, because it's a subculture because the other one is so massive.
The main culture,
majority.
the society now, information being compared, being passed, being broadcast, or messaging, communications, it all happens now through phones. And there is just no point in pretending otherwise. Every year, maybe an editor or someone else will say, do you know what, should we do a feature on dumb phones, on the desire to rid yourself of smartphones and, to break free. And every year, I've done a few of those features and I literally, every year it comes to the same conclusion, having looked at the evidence. No one's interested in dumb phones. It'll never be a thing anymore.
Right, but
if you're into tantric yoga, maybe. But you're talking about that kind of niche.
Yeah.
It's so niche. It will never again represent society, dumb phones.
Right, because everyone's a digital native and everyone interacts, with everyone else through this glass rectangle in their pockets. I understand that. But do you think that your perspective as technology editor is colouring that a wee bit?
I would hope it's not. So, one of the purposes of this podcast and for a lot of stuff I write increasingly is the interface between technology and society, and how one affects the other. And I mean, I remember all the moral panics before. I remember when camera phones were first launched into the Irish market, there was such shrieking and moral panic about their effect on children that the minister at the time called for a register, and like a sex offenders register, if you were to buy a camera phone. We've had the same with, broadband, video games. Do you remember the moral panic over video games? You'll still find some people who say that. There's no, like we are in a moral panic around social media at the moment. Now, to be clear, like as this podcast has demonstrated many times, there are unbelievably dark and bad effects from social media. We've just been talking about Telegram. I was there during the Dublin riots. I saw the crowds. There's no way those crowds could have assembled that quickly if it wasn't for communication platforms that made it possible. Right. It can be unbelievably powerful and unbelievably dangerous. There's no question they need to be monitored and regulated, as we're doing with the Digital Services Act and as we're gradually starting to do it with these online codes of safety.
Right. And then just going forward, you look at the future, you say there's no legislation in the pipeline. You've talked to senior politicians. Is there a sense then that like it's going to disappear, after August, or is it just a talking point now?
I think this will stay as a news item for a while, but it's already become a less heated one. I would say the last 2 weeks have been the most heated it has been in about a year, but it's nothing compared to 3 or 4 years ago. I remember late show episodes being devoted to this and people calling for a ban on, phones and the problem is the same now as it was then. Nobody is talking to the parents and the teens. If you talk to, a minister with a constituency of pensioners and older people, or people whose kids are grown up, or people who have just had kids, like toddlers, they are amenable to this argument. It strikes a chord with them. I don't want a bogeyman anywhere near my child. If you talk to families with children in the zone, that sort of 8-9-year-old to 14, 15, 16-year-old zone, it's a very, very different story. And I'm sorry, that's just the cold water that has to be thrown on this whole thing. You can't advance this unless you get parents and teens themselves on board. You can't legislate your way out of this. I think we've briefly time for the only other remaining story, which was about Oasis and the dynamic pricing of tickets. And I don't know if you have a take on this. I have a slightly more old-fashioned one on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I suppose you kind of imagine that it will be a set price up until a certain point, and it's like, the Ryanair flight that it gets close to the date and you're like, it's going to go up a tiny bit. I know there's certain rules and regulations in and around it, but dynamic pricing, correct me if I'm wrong, is just responding to demand, like overwhelming demand.
Absolutely.
And then it has this multiplier effect because of, the reunion effect of Oasis and how much, animosity there was between the two. But is that it essentially?
I think you have it in one. So there are two separate things here. One, as the economist Dan O'Brien, I think, correctly pointed out recently, if there is an abuse of a market position going on here from Ticketmaster, and if there needs to be investigation there, then that is definitely grounds for disquiet, and that is something that should be investigated. If they are not abusing their market position, and if if it's merely a case of outrage that a ticket that should have been €70 or €100 through a dynamic pricing process went up to €400 or €500, I'm sorry, that is not an outrage. That is basically supply and demand. And the only entity anyone should be outraged with is Oasis. They are the only entity who says whether or not they want their tickets for their show on their comeback tour to be ruled by dynamic pricing. They alone have the yay or nay to decide that. Well, they decided unequivocally, we want dynamic pricing. If there's loads of people who want to buy our tickets, we want that to go up to €600. That's what Oasis have said.
Right.
So why do they get a pass?
Yeah, and because of fandom, mainly, I would imagine.
No, I think it's because I think it's just people prefer giving out about Ticketmaster. And by the way,
Right, no, yeah, but that's what I mean. Is like there's fandom, and it's this, associated with this age in my life, and then there's this corporation, and which is easier to throw punches at?
I will say one thing that I would say is legitimate criticism of Ticketmaster, and that is the amount of time. Like, if you're not going to get a ticket to this, then it would be nicer to know that in 5 minutes rather than waiting in a queue, maybe being kicked out, and then, having to queue up again and spending an hour and a half, 2 hours, because that 2 hours of your time that you've spent, that's something that I think Ticketmaster could do a better job at. And I think you can legitimately criticize them and their infrastructure for that. That's not to do with Oasis. That's not to do with anything else. That's to do with their systems and their ability to efficiently sell you a ticket. And even though I don't think it's, I don't think they should be hauled before an Oireachtas committee over that.
Right.
A little bit incompetent.
But aren't they tacking on a €10 service charge for ticket buyers? Isn't it? That's
They can charge
general economics.
So that goes to the point of whether or not they have an abuse. They have a dominant market position that they are abusing. I don't know whether they do. If they do, then that €10 charge starts to come into focus.
Right. And just to go back on the dynamics pricing versus, do bands decide then, it's like, oh, we're going to have a tier that's, €55 a piece, one ticket. Like, so it's static pricing, i.e. it doesn't go up or down. And then they can opt for a section of dynamics. Is that the general, is it decision by the band, we want A or B, or band's management?
I actually think it's how big the band is and how big the tour is. If you go to a small gig, there's no such thing as dynamic pricing. You pay, it's 20 quid at the door.
Right.
Or even if you buy it in advance on, Eventbrite, or I don't know what the minimum size for a Ticketmaster gig is, but it's a lot smaller than Oasis. I suspect it's not. I suspect dynamic pricing often doesn't come into it. I know of the big bands, I think Robert Smith of The Cure, if unless I'm mistaken, they specified that they wouldn't have dynamic pricing for that. So they made a conscious decision. Oasis made a conscious decision to milk every last penny out of their fans. And by the way, this is all relative as well. If you're a millionaire, I'm not saying there's many millionaires in Ireland, you don't care if you're spending €600 on a ticket. You really don't.
Yeah. And I think as well, a side point to that is Oasis, they're getting back together, and you have to imagine that an element of that, of the Gallaghers coming together, is the colour green, and the profits that they could make, even though they can't stand each other.
Of course it is. Of course, that has to be a huge motivation. By the way, I wouldn't criticise them for that. I mean, people have a right to,
if people want it, a service,
absolutely, and people have a right to make money, and people have a right to put on huge gigs, and quite apart from all the millions they'll make, I'd say there is some buzz as well, and some ego boost you get from selling out a stadium, several times.
Undoubtedly,
over.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't blame them for that. And I wouldn't even really blame them for dynamic pricing insofar as they have decided they want to milk the absolute most they can. Clearly, a ticket for €500 has a value to some fans, and there's some fans who are willing to pay it, and they paid it. And what's the problem? It's a luxury good. We're not talking about food. We're not talking about bread and milk or a roof over your head. We're talking about an Oasis ticket. So I'm sorry, folks, but that's it. Blame Oasis. It's all their fault. And on that note, JJ Clark, who also produced this show, and Gav Hennessy, who was on audio. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us today on The Big Tech Show. I'm Adrian Weckler, and we'll talk to you soon.